All right. So, welcome to this very special shiur that we're going to give here, a part of our Monday night journey on Jewish literature. It is really today a real journey we're going to do. First of all, let's start with, unfortunately, those of you who do not have the bios. I should have posted this in online, but all right, so you'll have to do it today by hearing it. In the future, for those of you who are going to be on Zoom, I'm going to post these sheets online as well. Today, we're going to be discussing a fascinating theme, and that is something that we've been talking about it many times, and that is the fact that the Torah itself gives us indications, if we read it correctly, about laws and procedures and decisions that are not explicitly and openly written in the text, but that the intelligence of the rabbis, the intelligence of the students of Torah, allows us to, as somebody said, mine in the text and find these great jewels. And today we're going to be given the opportunity to see the work of a great scholar, the Hachaim, Chaim ibn Attar. I want to talk to you briefly about the story of this Rabbi Hachaim. Hachaim was born in Morocco in 1696. His name was Chaim ibn Attar. He was known as the Hachaim by the name of his commentary on the Bible, on the Torah. He was a Talmudist and a Kabbalist. He's interestingly enough highly regarded in Hasidic Judaism. They say that when he died in 1743, the Baal Shem Tov, during Sudash Lishit, felt, and nobody had known that he had died. And the Baal Shem Tov said, a light went out in the west. So since then, the Algaze has been considered to be very popular in Hasidic circles. Very quickly about him, he was a business. He had some business to do, and apparently he did not pay certain taxes, and he was persecuted by the anti-Semites in Morocco. He had to run and went out to the land to settle the land of Israel. En route, he was detained in Livorno. It was a very important, prominent city in the diaspora. Rich businessmen, the Jewish community, admired him greatly and wanted him to stay there. And they established a yeshiva for him. So for several years he was in Livorno. There they gave the money to publish his book in the Hachaim that we have now, Baruch Hashem. In addition to the Hebrew text, now we have an excellent translation in English by R. Scroll in several volumes with excellent notes. He was in the middle of 1742. He arrived in Jerusalem. He founded a synagogue called yeshiva called Knesset Israel, and one of his disciples was actually Chaim Yosef David Azulai, the famous Chida, and who wrote about his master's greatness. Attar's heart pulsated with Talmud. He uprooted mountains like a resistless torrent. His holiness was that of an angel of the Lord, having severed all connection with the affairs of the world. That's what he's called Hachaim Akadosh. A year after he arrived in Jerusalem, he died. He was on Shabbat, and he's buried in the Har HaZeitim in Jerusalem. Now, the Hachaim in this commentary that I'm going to take you through, a very long commentary on a verse in the Torah. He gives a very profound explanation to apparently a very simple verse. But I ask, if you don't mind, the Chumash, the Chumashim, should take a few Chumashim so we can actually see it. For everybody. Yeah. The parsha of this week actually is Emor, and as you see, chapter Leviticus 21, verse 1. So there's an anomaly there, or a strange form of presentation, which the Hachaim wonders about and raises a question. So please take a look at chapter 21:1. Vayikra 21:1. Those of you who have on Zoom, you have a Chumash at hand, I recommend that you take a look at it. We are going to be quoting a few verses as well. So it says, Vayomer Hashem Moshe, Emor el Kohanim bnei Aaron. Hashem says to Moshe, tell the Kohanim, the children of Aaron, Ve'amarta lehem, and you shall tell them, lenefesh lo yitama le'amav, that a Kohen is not allowed to be contaminated, cannot contract impurity. Impurity comes from corpses, from certain animals, and the carcasses of animals. So these sources of impurity, a Kohen cannot be in contact with. That's one of the reasons why Kohanim do not go to cemeteries, do not enter chapels, do not enter hospitals where somebody may have died. One of the problems of Kohanim is that they cannot so easily become doctors because of the issue of the anatomy and the classes and so on. So this is the principle that a Kohen cannot contract impurity. The Hachaim raises the question, why does it say Emor la Kohanim? And then it says Ve'amarta lehem. Three letters, 3 words after Emor, he says Ve'amarta lehem. Why does he repeat it? In order to answer this question, which is going to take us a lot of journey, and Mr. Hashem, today we'll be able to get to the conclusion. But he begins with a fascinating analysis. Let's take a look a little bit at your sheets. He says, and you will see where he does this, the answer to the question. It's going to take a while until we do this, but pay attention to this because it's a fascinating journey. He says in the Mishnah Torah, Rambam, Laws of Mourning, Ilchot Avel, chapter 3, Halacha 5. Ametame et HaKohen. If one intentionally, deliberately causes the Kohen to become Tameh. Like he takes a carcass and puts it next to his body. Or he pushes him into a cemetery. So, Imayu Shneim Mezidim, if both of them did it intentionally, as the Kohen, allowed himself to do it, he didn't resist it. Hare HaKohen lokeh, v'zeh shetim'o over al lifnei aver l'tem b'chshor. The one who makes him Kohen, Tameh, becomes also transgresses the law of do not put a stumbling block before the blind, which means, if you cause somebody to sin, you are actually not only making this sin, but you're making the additional sin of any kind of whenever you make somebody sin, you are transgressing this particular law. Do not put a stumbling block before the blind. This applies to any situation. If you give somebody food that is not kosher, and you tell them that it's kosher, you're transgressing this law as well.
Amen.
If the Kohen did not want to do it, just pushed him in. And he who made him impure was deliberate. He who caused him to be tameh, to be impure, receives punishment, receives the malkot. So think about it. The Hachaim is also asked the question: where does where does the Rambam learn this law? We know that a person cannot himself become impure. But where do we get the idea that if somebody else makes him impure, that he's also like? What does that have to do? A person who's not a Kohen can hold a carcass, can hold an animal. It's not, he can become impure. There's no law against. There's some restrictions on his behavior. He cannot go to the temple. he cannot eat certain food, but he is able, there's no prohibition on him becoming Tameh. So why, if he pushes the Kohen to become Tameh, why is he transgressing? That's the question that we're going to ask. But the Rambam says he is punishable. He receives Malkot. So the question is, where does this law come from? Where does it come from? Now the Hachaim, by the way, before we continue, I want to point out that the Rambam Maimonides is one of the books that have extensive commentaries since its publications. I don't think there's any other book except the Bible and the Gemara and the Mishnah that has received so many commentaries as the Rambam himself. I just want to give you a few examples. Migdal Oz, a disciple of the Rashba, early 14th century. The Magid Mishneh by Vidal of Tolosa, who was also a Spanish authority in the 14th century. All about to explain Maimonides' text. The Kesef Mishneh by Yosef Karo. Karo himself wrote a commentary on I should have given you this text. Maybe next time I'll give you. There's a book, Yekar Tiferet, by the Radbaz. There's a book, Lechem Mishneh, by the Avraham di Boton. We have a biography here. Mishneh Amel Amelech, by Yehuda Rosanes. Agaot Maimoniot, by Meir Cohen Rothenburg. And this is interesting, but this is also in the 14th century. Very early about. The tradition of studying Rambam is so common that the Brisker Rav, the Chaim of Brisk, he wrote the famous book, the Chidush Hachaim, is all about commentaries on the Rambam. So is also the Avnei Nezer and others. Many of the books today of the 18th century, 19th century are taking the Rambam and explaining halachot of the Rambam. So we're going today to see an important commentary. Let's talk a little bit at your biographies. First of all, Lechem Mishneh, Avraham Chia de Boton. Sometimes you may have heard of people, Biton. Biton is probably from this family, Boton, from Morocco. He actually lived afterwards in Salonika. He was taken as a rabbi. He wrote this book, Lechem Mishneh, the double bread. The word is a play on words, because the word Mishneh is the word for the Mishneh Torah, the title of the book of the Rambam. Lechem Mishneh is the double bread, it's offered on Shavuot. Shtei Alechem. So it's a very beautiful commentary on the Mishneh Torah. It's very. He also wrote other books as well. Another book on the Rambam is the Kesef Mishneh of Yosef Karo, written by the author of Shulchan Aruch. We don't have to read the story of Yosef Karo so much today. I mean, there's a long story. He was born in Toledo, settled in Israel and Tzfat. He was the major authority of the Jewish world when he was alive. Even the Rama in Krakow, who was the greatest authority in Ashkenazi Jewry, recognized Rabbi Yosef Karo as the great master, and when he was about to write his own Shulchan Aruch and heard that Rabbi Yosef Karo was writing it, he stopped writing it. And all he did was, after the book of Rabbi Yosef Karo was published, he made some annotations, what are called the Hagaot. As we see in every Shulchan Aruch, you see always the text of the Hagaot of Rama. Okay, so let's go, and finally it's writing by the Magid Mishneh, Vidal de Tolosa, a Spanish rabbi and scholar of the 14th century. Now, I mention this because the Hachaim asked the question. The prohibition may apply only to the Kohen. Where does the Torah say that, or where do you derive that one who causes him to make impure also is punished? It's as if he transgressed the law, not just punished for the principle of livnei velo de tevechsho. To cause somebody to sin is one issue, But he's punished because he made him impure. Where does the impurity affect somebody who's not a Kohen? That's the question that everybody asked. Such an important question, by the way, he points out both the Magid Mishneh, which we discussed, Vidal de Tolosa, and Rav Yosef Karo, the author of Kesef Mishnah, who usually provides sources for the Rambam's rulings, in this case, do not utter a word, no comment. He's concerned about it. The Lechem Mishneh, Rabbi Avraham Boton, is the only one who raises the question of the early commentators, and he says that the case of Mishnah says that the Rosh, Rabbi Asher, asked this question of the Rashba. Remember, the Rosh was the great authority of German Jewry, who, after the persecution in Germany, moved to Spain, and he went to the city of Toledo, and he was received and welcomed and helped by the Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet, who was the Rashba. So he asked, Rashba asked the Rosh, right? Or was the other way around? Yeah. The Rosh asked the Rashba, the other way around. The Rosh writes to Rashba, how do you explain this law? How is it possible? Where in the Torah does it say that a person who causes the Kohen to become atomic, he's transgressed? It's almost transgressing the same law. On what basis do we allow that? Apparently the rabbis did not know the answer. So what we're going to do today is we're going to find two explanations. One explanation of the Lechem Mishneh, and another explanation, a lengthy explanation, by the Hachaim, who disagrees with the Lechem Mishneh. Let's go. By the way, the Lechem Mishneh points out the same law applies, a similar ruling in Ilchot Kilayim. Please turn to source number 4, where it says, as we know, you're not allowed to wear clothes that have shatnez. That's Kilayim. In the Torah, Lo tilvash shatnez. So it says, Amalbish et chavero, source number 4, if somebody dresses a colleague or somebody in Kilayim, if the wearer is conscious, he is liable for lashes, and the person who dresses him is liable for placing a stumbling block before the blind. But if the person wearing the garment did not know that it was Kilayim, and the person who dressed him acted deliberately, that person is liable for lashes, and the wearer is exempt. Exempt because he did not commit any sin. Again, the same principle. Why is somebody who dresses somebody else with what is forbidden, why is he, in a sense, now guilty? Is it making him liable not for making him sin. In fact, he is exempt if he did not want to do it. But he is liable because he put sharpness on somebody else's body. Where in the Torah does it say that you're not allowed to put sharpness in somebody else's Torah? All it says is don't wear sharpness. Same law, same principle that we apply with the tummy. Questions? Yeah.
No, I mean, it sounds like it's kind of obvious. If you're not allowed to do it, to wear sharpness, obviously, why would you put it on somebody? Why would you do something like that?
Okay, but you're making him guilty almost of wearing sharpness. He's wearing lashes. You don't. What sin did he commit? If you say, okay, he caused the other guy to sin. But the other guy did not sin anyway because he's unaware. So what is he guilty of? So he says guilty of placing sharpness on somebody else. Where in the Torah does it say that? That's the question that the rabbis are asking.
Don't put a stumbling block, no?
But as we explained, in this case, since he was unconscious of it, he is not liable either. The wearer did not do any sin. would only be a sin if he told him wear it because it's not and the guy was careless.
No, but he does have a different avera of the stumbling block when the other guy's willingly wearing
Right,
the shatnez.
absolutely.
Because now he's certainly violating shatnez and he's violating something else.
Right. Yes. Yeah. When the guy deliberately wants to do it, the person himself, then the other one who dresses him is not liable for the lashes. He's liable for the other one. Don't put up somebody back for the line. But when the guy is unaware, the sin of wearing shatnez in a way devolves on the person who put it onto him, which seems to me no sense. The Torah only forbids somebody to wear shatnez. It doesn't say you're not allowed to put shatnez on somebody else, and yet he received lashes for that action. Where does it say that?
Do you want your brother as yourself?
Okay, maybe, but in lashes here are not for transgressing a positive commandment, which would be love your neighbor. Lashes when you transgress a prohibition. A prohibition. And the question is, where is the prohibition that says you're not allowed to put the garment on somebody else? So these are the same questions. Where does it say that by making a kohen tameh, you are transgressing the law of tuma, of impurity? Apparently, there's no such law. Neither is a law of putting some garment on somebody else. So now we're going to come to a fascinating deduction. And please bear in mind, we're in a very profound logical journey. The Lechem Mishneh first makes an interesting suggestion. We will see actually, let's take a look a little bit inside. Look at source number 7. Source number 6 is going to actually use this verse. And you can take a look actually, if you don't mind, those of you who have the Chumash, please go directly to 6, chapter 6, Bamidbar, number 6, chapter 6, verse 9. Okay, let's take a look quickly at Hebrew. The Chiyamut met alav, talking about a nazir. If a person is, next to somebody who is sick and somebody he dies, has a heart attack, the feta pitom. So now this person who dies is a source of impurity, and the nazir is not allowed to be in contact with a corpse. So the timeh rosh nizro, and he contaminates, and this is the active form of the verb, timeh. Timeh means he contaminates his Nazarite head. So then, in that case, he has to shave his head on the seventh day, and there's a whole procedure of what happened. So the Lechem Mishnah says, why, in the case of the Nazir, if somebody contaminates the Nazir intentionally, and the Nazir is not aware of it, the person who contaminates him is not liable. The Nazir is not liable. Let's look a little bit at the, so we can see, yeah. So how do we know that the person who contaminates a Nazir is not liable? So the rabbis say in the Gemara, because the Torah says v'timmo, he himself becomes impure. He contaminates himself.
But maybe that's just in the case, the guy who contaminated, who made him tameh, is dead. So we can't give him lashes. So maybe that's a special case of he dropped dead. But if someone had carried the body in or done something like that,
Very good. But no, but the halacha is that if a person does it, brings the corpse to him, he also is not liable. And it's deduced from the verse, the part that says "vitimo," the fact that he himself did it. So means the Torah comes to exclude. There is a principle in reading the Bible, in the Torah, of inclusion and exclusion, right? Sometimes the Torah tells us something to include something, and sometimes the Torah gives us the text to exclude something. In this case, the Torah comes to exclude that somebody else made him impure, by saying only if he himself become impure, which means that somebody else makes him impure, it would not be liable. The person would not be liable.
and the fact that he has to bring certain korbanot and things like that, that's kind of a liability or a makeup for the liability. It's like
Financially,
a kumase for some kind of lotase that he did.
Oh, you mean for the person who does it?
For the nazar.
Right.
So, he, instead of being punished, like he has to now bring his korbanot.
Like shogeg.
Oh, you're saying that this is done instead.
There is sort of a punishment, but it's not a punishment. Right. It's more like now you have to bring these korbanot.
Right. But the person who does it is exempt completely. He doesn't have any obligations. And the question is, why does it have an obligation? Because the Torah exempted him by saying the only time that you can become, that a Nazir is liable to lashes is if he himself contaminates himself. But if somebody else contaminates him, that person is exempt. That is the deduction.
Both that person and the nazir, in a way.
Yes, right, the Nazir too.
It's just a different kind of avera.
Very, very.
Yeah.
Yeah, but all the others averot are moral. They're in the realm of ethics, but they're not in the legal liability of a person who made a sin. In this case, contaminate the Nazir. And the reason is that the contaminated the Nazir is not. Is exempted. The Torah itself, by saying "V'timeh," he himself contaminates himself, comes to say only he and somebody else. Wherever the Torah, Michael, emphasizes one point, it comes to exclude something else. By saying this you shall do, it means the other one you cannot do or do not have to do. When the Torah wants to, so that's called the principle of exclusion, mi'ut, lema'et. And that's what
we could say that in Tuma and Tahara or the Nazir, this is one set of rules, and maybe the Kilayim is a different set of rules.
Well, but we are saying here that in the Tameh of the Kohen is also.
But
Right, very good. If you could be separated Tumah from Kilayim.
The principle is the same.
No?
Right.
The principle is the same.
And it still applies to the Kohen.
No, but I'm saying that David wanted to make a distinction, perhaps between the Kohen and not a Tumah and not a Tumah, but the Kohen is also Tumah, and the guy is liable. And in this case, it is Tumah, you're not liable. So here is a Lechem Mishneh, brilliant deduction. Listen to this. We want to justify why, right? Jerry, listen. We want to justify why, if a person contaminates a Kohen, he is liable. Whereas a person who contaminates a Nazir is not liable. So the Lechem Mishneh makes the following deduction. We want to know why, when you contaminate a Kohen, you're liable, because that is the general principle. And that's why the Torah had to go out of its way, in the case of the Nazir, to create a verse that would say, in this case, and only in this case, the person who brings the tuma to the nazir is not liable. But in other cases, in general, he would, a person like in the Kohen or the Kilai, he would be liable. That's the logic of the Lechem Mishneh. A brilliant logic. I want to tell you, by the way, that the Lechem Mishneh, as he continues his commentary, he himself says that he's not happy with that explanation. And that we find one special reason. And I'm going to ask you, first of all, to figure out what is the objection to this logic. He ends up by saying that he doesn't know what it is. He maybe there's a distinction is some divrei Kabbalah, something in Kabbalah, something about Kilayim, something about the Tumah, and he's very goes into a long, lengthy explanation. Essentially saying there's no logic. What in his argument do you think is the fault in the argument? Let's review it again. He's saying, we want to say how does the Rambam say that if you contaminate a coin intentionally, you are liable. And he says, you learn this from the fact that when you contaminate a Nazir, the Torah says you are not liable. So this is the way he argues. Why should the Torah go out of its way to say he contaminates a Nazir is not liable, that only the Nazir himself is liable if he does it himself? Why should the Torah make this point here to tell us that otherwise, if it were not for this, we would have thought that he is liable? And that means that in other cases, not the Nazir, where the Torah specifically exempts it, we say everybody else is liable. That's his logic.
Rabbi, could it be that extra time it says, say in the Torah, one refers to the Kohanim, the other refers to the people? The people are required to know this law. So this law was given to the people too?
No, but in both cases, with the Kohen and the people, the person who does it is liable. There's no difference. We're not talking about the Nazir, now talking about two cases. The person who dresses somebody else with shatnez, a regular person, and a person who brings a corpse next to the Kohen. In both cases, the person is liable. He gets lashes. He gets lashes in one case for the Kilayim law, the Shatnez law, and the other case for the Tumah law.
Right, and so he gets lashes, according to this thought process, he gets lashes because Hachaim commanded Moshe to tell everybody that a Kohen cannot touch a corpse. So then people are breaking directly the commandment instead of indirectly.
Right. If it's a negative commandment for which you receive lashes, you should have a specific pasuk to warn you of this.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be indirect, like he says, like, oh, we'll just assume it indirectly. You need a pasuk to tell you, now you know you violated it. So it can't be learning
a deduction.
Right, a deduction.
Okay.
It has to be a lav. Where's the lav in the Torah?
Okay. That's very good, by the way. That is a good argument. That in order to punish somebody, there has to be something in the Torah that it says. And here what he's saying is a deduction that because of this, you learn that in other cases it's not. It's not specifically. Now, it's a good argument, but not necessarily. You could argue, in general, that why would the Torah exempt it here? I mean, it specifically exempted this guy. If it was the normal law, they would not need to exempt. You would say, nobody would be able to even think that it's liable. Here the Torah goes out of its way and says, this guy is not liable. Who would have thought it was liable?
Yeah, but this kind of case is a case where it says it suddenly happened.
No, but it refers to in general, not only in this case. You're right. No. I know what you're saying. It's not only this case. It is, in general, the law is that
Even if he slowly died.
yes.
Does it have to do with the fact that the Nazir he's doing this voluntarily? He's taking this upon himself to have this level of, to prevent all these things.
You mean
Whereas as a Kohen is like he has no choice, or the law of shotness applies to everybody. I mean,
yeah, but in both cases, the victim is unaware. In both cases, he doesn't want to, because if he wants to, then he is liable. We're talking a case in which he's not. He is forced. Somebody puts a coat of shotness on you. Do you remember there is an important principle, and the principle of binyan av? What does binyan av means? That if a law applies in one situation, then the same law would apply in all situations that are similar to it. So that the Hachaim finds the greatest fault in the argument of the Lechem Mishneh. He says, why you want to say that because here we see an exception to the rule, there is some sort of written loose in the opposite direction somewhere, which, I agree with David's point that law is not stated anywhere. You assume, it's like a ghost law, that we're saying this is the exception to that law that we never heard. Why don't we do the opposite? Why don't you say, just as in this case, he's not liable, then it should be not liable in all cases.
It's a binyan av mikatuv echad.
Oh, that's good. It's okay. Binyan av means that in some cases when the law is established in one area, the same law applies to all areas that are similar, that have similar characteristics. It's called, how do you translate the binyan av? A source law. A source law that this is a source and it applies in all other situations.
Like an umbrella over all situations.
Yeah, that this law is not only applicable to this, but it applies to all similar cases. Okay. So he says, instead of arguing the way that he argued, that this exception shows that there was a rule, what is it called? The exception proves the rule.
The rule,
right? Instead of saying this exemption proves that there was a rule, well, it's just the opposite. So it's not an exception. This is the rule for all cases. And therefore, anybody who contaminates a Nazir, contaminates a Kohen, who puts the shadness on the face of somebody who doesn't want to be here, all of these people should not be liable. And yet the halacha, and we will discuss later why the halacha is that way, by the way. This is an interesting question. I leave it aside, because if we're discussing this issue, how do we know the halacha is the other way around? We'll discuss, do you understand the problem? How do we know that if you do contaminate a Kohen, you are liable?
Well, the Rambam seems to know somehow.
Right, exactly.
But he doesn't say how.
Exactly. And that's the problem of the Rosh, of the Rashba, of the Hachaim. Where is this law? And it cannot be from the deduction of the Lechem Mishneh. Because in the Lechem Mishneh, all they're saying is, I have an exception here. I said, in this case, you do not find the person who contaminates the Nazir guilty. Let him alone. Because it says this, the Lechem Mishneh says, that means, since the Torah is forced to say, you do not make this guy guilty, that in all of the cases, it will be guilty. That's what he says. He said, but that's not logical. So he says the opposite. He says that you could argue the other way around, from logic. Leave alone what the law is. From logic, you would have to say, in all these cases, it should be the same. Whoever makes somebody else sin when the person does not want to sin, the person himself is not liable either. Because he did not sin.
The Metame, he knew what he's doing, right? He knew the Metame, the one who make the...
He knew, yeah.
He knew what he's doing.
Yeah.
So it's like intentional.
Right, but what sin did he commit? That's the question.
If you do it intentional,
You cannot give lashes unless you, as David pointed out, unless you transgress a prohibition. And where's a
no, I
prohibition that
understand,
says
yeah.
you're not allowed to put shabbos on
Right,
somebody
but
else's
It's
body?
kind of like what Mark said before, that the Nazir brought this on himself and he's not allowed to make himself tamei. So the Nazir is kind of a unique case, unlike the Kohen, where there's a blanket rule, all Kohanim, everybody knows, cannot be tamei. Here's a man whom himself made himself that he
Mark,
should not.
I'm sorry, I did not get that point.
Right, so that was kind of what Mark was saying. So maybe because his source of avoiding Tomei is self-generated, his violation of becoming Tomei is totally a part of him. It's no longer like for the rest of us, like the way it would be with a Kohen, because a Kohen is a blanket statement.
What would that, I mean, I understand, but what would that exempt or make the sin of the person who does it any different? Okay, you're right.
Okay, so then, yeah.
Different case.
Huh?
It's a different case, that's all. And maybe you can't take comparison to that extreme. You have to limit it to the Nazir.
The Nazir is a very exceptional case, but
So-
you're right. He should at least like Bifnei Iver Baltas.
Well, that's for sure, that's for sure. But I ask you a question, I don't understand. You're saying that because the Nazir brought upon himself, that the person who does it on him should not be punished? Is that...
Yeah, this is an exceptional kind of case where only the Nazir is commanded not to let himself become Tamei.
Okay, so you say that it's a special case.
Right.
Okay.
It is.
Or the person should be punished for a different reason. There may be another reason for
Yeah. No, we are talking about the lashes for this prohibition. Yes, you're right. Only this. Well, that is not a, that's a possible answer. That's a possible answer, that this is an exception. But, okay, so we make it, now let's go to the question of the Kohen. So this is an exceptional case, which means in all cases, it should be the person who contaminates the Kohen should be liable, right? So now we go back to the same problem. That's the Lechem Mishneh. Where is that law? You're deducing the law. There you go. Your logic is good. But now we come to the problem of there is no text that says that a person who brings impurity to the Kohen should be liable.
Right, because you're not in a normal case, he's unaware. You're not causing him to be
To sin, right?
sin. When he is aware, though, you're also not causing him to sin. He's sinning.
Right. Right.
So how do you get responsible when he's not
Wait.
aware?
Yeah, right.
In the Torah, when it says, with the stumbling block, does it say what the punishment is for putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person? Do you assume the guilt, the punishment that other person would have had?
There is lashes also. There's lashes.
So
Whenever you
that's
can-
where it's from.
Yeah, but the lashes that he gets for this is different. It's the lashes for the transgression of this law of impurity. It's not the same. You may get actually.
It may feel the same.
I'm just saying, I don't think I would notice the difference.
Well, maybe smaller, maybe smaller. No, I don't know. No, but it's also the sin that you commit. May be different. You in the eyes of Hashem, in the accounting of Hashem, maybe a little different. So let me go a little bit into what the Hachaim. Hachaim writes, by the way, he says, "Divrei Rav enam nir'im." They are not logical. What the Lechem Mishneh said. The Lechem Mishneh says, since the Torah makes the Nazir an exception, that means that in other cases, when there's not an exception, the person who makes the person sin is liable too. Or the person who makes him impure, not makes him sin, makes him impure, is also liable. They said, no, that's what the Lechem Mishnah says. So he says, that's not logical, because maybe the Torah maybe excluded the metame for a different reason. And now he comes to a very fascinating principle. He says, if one shaves, you can have, yeah. Okay, let's go to source number 9. It says, Tuma, in Tuma, you make you could make Tuma v'Nazir, you could make you could make the argument that when you make a Nazir Tameh, the Metame, meaning the person who causes him to become Tameh, is equal to the Mitame, to the person who became impure. And that would be a Kal Vachomer. We would say a Kal Vachomer. We could say a following a fortiori argument. Mitiglacha. Tiglacha means that Nazir is not allowed to shave his head. And in the shaving of the head, the Torah specifically says that he who cuts the Nazir's head is equal to the person, Nazir himself, cutting his own hair. In other words, forget about the translation for a moment, just follow my translation. Shaving the hair of the head by somebody else, the person who shaves it is also liable, just like the Nazir shaving his own hair. There says, Asaba megaleach kamit galeach. See, Shimon, yeah? Megaleach is the active person, mit galeach is the person who's being shaved. Tuma, which is much more serious, because a person who is shaves his hair or gets shaves impurity in the hair, all he needs is just
To redo
30 days.
the
30 days, for 30 days. But Tuma, you have to do from the beginning. So if a person is Nazir for 5 years, and he makes this Kam Tameh, the 5 years are erased. They go by the way, so he has to start all over again. But an impurity of if he cuts his hair, all he suspends is another 30 days. He loses 30 days and he continues. So we see that Tuma is much more serious than Miglachat, and yet, wouldn't it be logical that if you become Tameh, that also the person who makes you Tameh also is liable? That's what it say, Eino din shenase bat metame ke metame. For that reason, the Torah says the person should the timer rosh nizro, that the Nazir is only liable, is the only one is liable is the Nazir if he himself commits his own, becomes impure. Which means the person who makes a Nazir impure is not liable. So, but what the Hachaim wants to show here is that the reason we said, why did the Torah come and say, let's make an exception, let's make sure that the person who makes a Nazir Tameh, that person is not liable, from the Timer Rosh Yisro. The Torah specifically singles out this case and says, this person who makes a Nazir Tameh is not liable. Why did the Torah say that? So we thought that because in all other cases, the logical or the default would be that the person who makes him Tameh also becomes liable to lashes. No, he says the reason this is for other different reason. The Torah had to make this, and since we have to justify why does the Torah goes out of its way to say that a person who makes a Nazir Tameh is not liable, because in the case of shaving, a person who shaves a person would make it liable, would become liable, just like he himself cutting his own hair. The Torah says, the Nazir, you're not allowed to cut your hair. If somebody else cuts the hair of the Nazir, it's liable to the same law. So that's what the Torah says. That's what the Torah has to say. In the case of Tuma, it doesn't apply. Because you, otherwise by Kal Vachomer, you could have thought that it applies. So now we explain why the Torah gives this exception. Not because of what we thought before, that the exact exception, because in the default is that the person who causes the Tuma is also liable. No, for a different reason.
There's no binyan av here.
No biyanav, and the exception is not about a ghost law that appears there. That says that whenever cause tuma, impurity to somebody else, you also become liable. There's no such thing. So he rejects the argument.
But there's a specific wording in the pasuk that we know the Megaleach and the Mitgaleach are the same, are treated the same. This is a pasuk that tells us that?
Yes. That's what we're going to discover. Very good. Where is that?
Right. And so.
And same thing with the metame. Yes.
Right. And so even though the metame is for the nazir is more serious, for some reason the Torah creates a unique exception for him.
I mean, if he didn't, you would have thought that it is liable because of the Kal Vachomer. Do you understand, Mark or Jerry? Since the Torah says that a person who shaves the head of a Nazir is liable like the Nazir, we would have thought that if he makes him impure, should equally be like the Nazir, which by Torah, because impurity is even more serious, more egregious sin than shaving. And that's what the Torah says, but in Tama, no, we do not know why. The Torah doesn't want to make the person who makes it Nazir Tameh liable. So that's what the Torah says, only him makes you liable, not somebody else. So now we understand the logic of the Lechem Mishneh falls off. Because the whole logic of the Lechem Mishneh to justify the law that says that if you make a Kohen Tameh, you are liable like the Kohen. And the reason he said that is because of this exception. The Torah goes out of its way to say, in the case of the Nazir, who makes him when somebody makes him Tu'am Tameh, he's not liable. Why not liable? Why the Torah says this? Because in general, we would think it is
all the other situations, the Kal Vachomer would apply.
It would be liable, right? So we follow now. We now have to find the reason. And David, we have a little bit of time. We're still a little bit late, but I want to go to that because I don't want to go to the next. So this is a brilliant idea. I'll give you quickly the text that he says. Why, you ask the question, how do we know that a person who shaves the head of a Nazir is liable? So let's go to the source number 10. ותגלחת לא נעשה בה מגלח כמתגלח קל וחומר מטומאה. Since we said already that a person who makes a Nazir impure is not liable, and we know that Tuma, impurity, is a more serious sin than shaving of the hair, it would be logical to say that if making somebody, the Nazir, impure, you don't commit a sin, shaving his head, we shouldn't commit a sin. But the Torah says, and that's what it says, Lo kol sheken shelo na'aseh ma'aleh k'mitgalech, shouldn't it be that the person who shaves him shouldn't be like the person who's shaven? Yet the Torah says, Amar Kra, the Torah contradicts that logic and says, Ta'ar lo ya'avor al rosho, a razor shall not pass over his head.
Explicitly.
Passive.
Very good. It's not him. Is the razor, the act of the razor, whoever does it, whether it's he or the other person, are equal, and that's why they're liable. And in this, the Hachaim makes his whole deduction. But let's quickly go through all the cases. In the case of the, we don't have time to analyze it. So he says, in the case of the razor is the razor. In the kilaim, look quickly, please, in Vayikra Leviticus 19. 19:19. What does it say? By the way, Taran Yavor, we just went through that. So we saw chapter 6, Bamidbar 6:9, right? No, sorry, is
Kilayim.
no. In chapter 6, 6 verse 5. Bamidbar 6:5. It says there, Kol yemeneder nizro, all the days that he is a Nazir, tar lo ya'avor al rosho. A razor shall not pass. So that means it doesn't matter who does it. Let's go to Kilayim. Kilayim, verse 19:19. What does it say?
Beged kilayim shatnez no ya'aleh alech. So it's again passive.
A passive. And finally, now we go to our parsha, Emor. What does it say about the Kohen? Let's see, you can figure it out yourself now, on this logic.
Well, that's the
Verse 1.
right. Yeah, that's the whole duplication.
Well,
More ve'amarta lehem.
First of all-
Nefesh lo yitama.
Itama is in the passive form. He shall not be impure. It doesn't matter whether he himself makes him impure or somebody else makes him impure. And now we go to the two Emor. What do you think is the two Emor of Marta? Why does it say Emor and this is a Ve'amarta? There's a final piece.
Right. Not only you're telling the Kohanim not to do it, you're telling everybody else not to do it.
Yishar Koach. The prohibition is not just on the Kohen, is also on the other people who may want to make the Kohen impure, but you're not allowed. That's the way the Hachaim explains why it says Emor and Ve'amarta alehem. Emor al Kohanim, Ve'amarta alehem is to Bnei Israel. Yafeh. It's unbelievable how he did it together. So the answer is as follows. David asked the question, where in the Torah does it say that somebody who causes the Kohen to become impure, he himself receives lashes? Where the Torah does say that if you put sharpness on somebody else's body, you become liable to lashes? The answer is because these forms, or by shaving the Nazir, all of these verses are said in the passive form. Passive means regardless of who does it, whether you do it or it's done to you, both the person who sucked the victim and the person who does it, both are liable. But in the case of the Tumah of the Nazir, the Torah specifically uses the active verb, v'timeh. He himself becomes impure. So we see here, by reading the Torah correctly, with the proper tenses and the proper verbs, you can deduce all of these laws together. And that's why, in the case of the Nazir, of the shaving of the Nazir, the person is liable, the person who does it. In the case of putting a kilayim, the person is liable, and the person in the Mektame Kohen is also liable, because in all of these cases, it's in the passive form. Whereas in the case of making the Nazir impure, which is the only exception, the verb is in the active form.
Very good. Very good.
Beautiful.
Excellent.
I want to tell you, by the way, that the Hachaim at the end makes a beautiful point. Says that others explain Emor Ve'amarta in a different way, and he quotes different forms. And he says, but anyway, this is beautiful word. I want to show you what he says when he sees that other explanations exist. So he says, Nevertheless, the Torah lends itself to multiple valid interpretations, as the rabbis say, "Elu va'elu re'elo Hachaim." These are the words. But the explanation of the Hachaim is brilliant. How he went from one point to the other. First of all, to ask the question, let's just read quickly. Where does it say that if you make a Kohen impure, you are also liable, like the Kohen? And you cannot deduce it from the fact that in the case of the not making a Nazir impure, he's not liable as an exception, and then the rule normally would be that the person would be liable, because that would be creating a ghost law that doesn't exist. And also, he gives another reason why the exception exists. It's because of the Kal Vachomer. We would say that if a person who shaves somebody is liable, somebody who makes somebody tameh, a Nazir tameh, will be more liable. And that's what the Torah has to come and say specifically only he himself and not somebody else. So now that the argument falls off, wherever is the source that a person who makes a Kohen tameh, a person who puts a kilayim on a person who shaves the Nazir's head, where does it say that that person is liable? Because in all of the three cases,
It's the passive
a
voice.
passive voice. They're beautiful. Okay.
All right, thank you. Excellent.
Beautiful. Okay.
Good.
And by the way, this is the brilliance of the Hachaim HaKadosh. Jerry, that you are reading, right? It's beautiful. And how he analyzes, also gives us a beautiful history of this analysis that started. Remember, the question that the Hachaim asked was asked by the Rosh, was asked by the Rashba, and they did not know the answer. Brilliant.
That's why it's generally a good rule to try to figure out where the Rambam came up with this from.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't say, so.
Right.
you
Oh,
don't-
that's a good game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what's the answer about the Rambam?
He must have known all of this.
Yeah.
He must have known all
He
of
figured
it.
it out.
It was obvious to him. It wasn't even a
Right,
question.
exactly. We needed to find out why he did it. He didn't have to.
Right, yeah. Amazing. Well, both of them must have some Srata Deshmaya.
Yeah, it's beferish. It's
Yeah.
beferish.
And that's what makes the Rambam so amazing. That the people say, where did he get it from? And then when we figure it out, oh my God, he must have been. Maybe there could be other reasons too. But at least we found one.
They were swimming in Torah, you know.
All right, so
That's all they had.
thank you very much for doing. I'm sorry that those of you. Huh?
Well, see you tomorrow
See you
morning.
tomorrow. I'm sorry that we did not have. We were very technological today. So,
Okay.
but we cannot give you whiskey
I
remotely.
got plenty here. Okay.